Imagine being loved by your father but hated by your own brothers. Imagine having a dream from God, only to discover that the dream would lead you through pain, betrayal, and years of suffering. This is the story of Joseph, a young man whose life seemed to fall apart before God finally revealed his purpose. Long ago, in the land of Canaan, there lived a man named Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, but among all his children, Joseph held a special place in his heart. Joseph was only 17 years old. He was young, innocent, and deeply loved by his father. Jacob made Joseph a beautiful special robe, and when Joseph's brothers saw it, their hearts became filled with jealousy. They wondered, why does our father love Joseph more than us? But Joseph had something even more powerful than his father's love. He had dreams. One night, Joseph dreamed that he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in a field. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf stood upright, while his brothers' sheaves gathered around it and bowed down. When Joseph told his brothers about the dream, they became even more angry. "Do you really think you will rule over us?" they asked. But Joseph had another dream. This time, he saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. Even his father was surprised. Jacob questioned him about the dream, but he remembered it in his heart. Joseph could not have known what those dreams meant. He could not have imagined the journey ahead. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers. Joseph traveled across the land searching for them. When his brothers saw him approaching from a distance, they recognized him immediately, and they began to plan against him. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. Their jealousy had turned into hatred. They wanted Joseph dead, but Reuben, the oldest brother, tried to save him. Instead of killing Joseph, they threw him into a deep, empty pit. Joseph cried out for help, but his brothers would not listen. Then they saw a caravan of traders traveling toward Egypt, and Judah suggested that they sell Joseph as a slave. So Joseph was pulled out of the pit and sold. His own brothers had sold him. The young dreamer was taken away from his family, taken away from his father, and carried toward a foreign land. As Joseph disappeared into the distance, he had no idea what the future held. But God had not abandoned him. The dream had not died. It had only begun. Joseph was taken to Egypt, a land he had never known. There, he was sold as a slave to a powerful Egyptian officer named Potiphar. Joseph had lost his freedom. He had lost his family. He had lost everything he knew. But he did not lose his faith in God. Joseph worked faithfully, and God was with him. Soon, Potiphar noticed something different about Joseph. Everything Joseph touched seemed to prosper. Potiphar trusted him with more and more responsibility. Eventually, Joseph became the manager of Potiphar's entire household. But Joseph's greatest test was still ahead. Potiphar's wife tried to tempt Joseph, but Joseph refused. He knew that doing wrong would be a sin against God. One day, she grabbed Joseph's clothing. Joseph ran away, leaving his garment behind. But instead of admitting the truth, Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of attacking her. Potiphar became furious. Joseph was innocent, but he was sent to prison. Once again, Joseph lost everything, from the pit to slavery, and now to prison. It seemed as if his dreams were becoming impossible, but God was still with Joseph. Even in prison, Joseph remained faithful. The prison keeper noticed his wisdom and trusted him with responsibility. One day, 2 of Pharaoh's servants were imprisoned with Joseph. One was Pharaoh's cupbearer, the other was Pharaoh's baker. Both men had strange dreams. Joseph saw that they were troubled, so he asked them what was wrong. They told him their dreams. Joseph explained that God was the one who could reveal their meaning, and Joseph interpreted their dreams correctly. The cupbearer would be restored to his position, but the baker would not survive. Joseph then asked the cupbearer to remember him and speak to Pharaoh about him. The cupbearer promised to help, but when he returned to Pharaoh's service, he forgot Joseph. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. And Joseph remained in prison. He must have wondered, God, when will my situation change? But Joseph did not know that God was preparing something much bigger. Then, one night, Pharaoh had two disturbing dreams, and no one in Egypt could explain them. That was the moment everything changed. Pharaoh woke up troubled. He called Egypt's wise men and magicians, but none of them could explain his dreams. Then the cupbearer remembered Joseph. He remembered the young Hebrew man in prison, the man who had correctly interpreted his dream. So Joseph was brought before Pharaoh. After years in prison, Joseph suddenly stood inside the greatest palace in Egypt. Pharaoh looked at him and said, "I have heard that you can interpret dreams." But Joseph did not take the glory for himself. He answered, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh the answer." Pharaoh then told Joseph his dreams. He had seen 7 healthy cows coming out of the Nile. Then 7 thin and sickly cows appeared and swallowed the healthy cows. After that, Pharaoh saw 7 full ears of grain. Then 7 thin ears of grain appeared and swallowed the healthy ones. Joseph understood. The 7 healthy cows and 7 full ears of grain represented 7 years of great abundance. Egypt would have more food than it could imagine. But after those 7 years, 7 terrible years of famine would come. Joseph then gave Pharaoh a plan. Egypt needed to store grain during the years of abundance so that the people would survive the famine. Pharaoh was amazed by Joseph's wisdom. He realized that there was no one better suited to manage Egypt, so Pharaoh took his royal ring and placed it on Joseph's hand. Joseph was given authority over Egypt. The prisoner had become a ruler. The slave had become second in command. The dreamer had risen to a position nobody could have imagined. Joseph was only 30 years old, and now he was responsible for preparing an entire nation for the coming famine. For 7 years, Egypt experienced incredible abundance. Joseph gathered enormous amounts of grain. The storehouses became filled. But then the famine arrived. People across the surrounding lands had nothing to eat, and among those who needed food were Joseph's own brothers. The famine had reached Canaan. Jacob and his sons were hungry, so Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain. Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt, but they did not know what awaited them. When they entered the palace, they bowed before the powerful governor. They did not recognize him, but Joseph recognized them immediately. These were the same brothers who had thrown him into the pit, the same brothers who had sold him as a slave. And now they were standing before him. Joseph could have taken revenge. He had the power to punish them, but instead, he tested them. He wanted to know if they had changed. Eventually, Joseph demanded that they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, to Egypt. Benjamin was Joseph's full brother, and Jacob was terrified of losing him. But eventually, Benjamin came with his brothers. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his emotions became overwhelming. He secretly left the room and wept. After many years, he was finally looking at his brother again, but Joseph continued his test. A silver cup was secretly placed in Benjamin's sack. As the brothers traveled away, Joseph's servants stopped them. The cup was discovered. The brothers were devastated. They returned to Joseph, and Judah stepped forward. He begged Joseph to allow Benjamin to return home. Judah explained that their father loved Benjamin deeply, and that losing him could destroy their father's heart. Joseph listened, and something changed inside him. He could no longer hide his emotions. He ordered everyone except his brothers to leave the room. Then Joseph began to cry. His brothers stood in confusion, and Joseph finally said, "I am Joseph." The room became silent. His brothers could not believe what they were hearing. The powerful ruler standing before them was the brother they had sold into slavery. They were terrified. They expected revenge. But Joseph did something they never expected. He forgave them. Joseph looked at his brothers, and instead of condemning them, he comforted them. He told them not to be afraid. What they had done to him had been evil, but God had used even their terrible actions to accomplish something greater. Joseph understood something his brothers could not see. Years earlier, they thought they were destroying his future, but God was preparing him. The pit prepared Joseph for the palace. The slavery prepared him for leadership. The prison prepared him for the throne. and the suffering prepared him for his purpose. Joseph told his brothers that God had sent him ahead to preserve lives during the famine. Then he asked about his father. "Is my father still alive?" When Joseph learned that Jacob was alive, he sent for him. Jacob could hardly believe the news. His beloved son Joseph, the son he thought was dead, was alive, and he was now ruler over Egypt. Jacob traveled to Egypt, and when Joseph saw his father, he ran toward him. Father and son embraced. They wept together. Years of separation, years of pain, and years of unanswered questions were finally replaced by joy. Joseph's entire family settled in Egypt. The family that had once been divided by jealousy was now reunited, and Joseph lived to see his children and grandchildren. Near the end of his life, Joseph reminded his brothers of an important truth. What they had intended for evil, God had turned for good. Joseph's story teaches us that sometimes we cannot understand what God is doing. You may be in your own pit right now. You may feel forgotten. You may feel like your prayers are unanswered. You may be wondering why God has allowed certain things to happen. But Joseph's life reminds us that the chapter you are living today may not be the ending. The pit was not Joseph's ending. The prison was not his ending. The betrayal was not his ending. God was working behind the scenes. And at the right time, Joseph's purpose became clear. So keep trusting God. Keep your faith. Keep moving forward, because what looks like the end may only be the beginning of God's plan. And remember the powerful words of Joseph: "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." If you are going through a difficult season, don't give up. God is still writing your story. This is Faith Rising Motivation. May God strengthen you, give you hope, and help you remain faithful.